let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome Dr. Tortella and Dr. Omert. I really appreciate you joining us this evening to talk to us about careers as they intersect with industry. So I'll keep my part brief while everyone's here to hear you speak.
Thanks very much. I also want to welcome everyone who's taken time for this contemporaneous session, as well as those individuals who will be looking at this in a recorded fashion. By nature of our business, patients are the most important thing. So we really change our schedule to meet their needs. So anybody who's looking at this in a recording fashion, thank you for taking the time for looking at it. Laurel and I are going to talk a little bit about that topic of industry. And it's a black box to many. I know certainly it was a black box to me when I first went into industry, and that was about 2003. And the beauty of it is once you peel back those layers and turn on the light in that black box, it's a tremendously fulfilling way to continue to help patients, albeit in a different way, and very fulfilling. And Laurel will talk about some of the things she's contributed as far as her journey in industry, and I'll talk a little bit about my Novo 7 journey back in the day. But it is a tremendous way to continue to contribute to the care of patients and the unique opportunities to conduct trials or to talk about the science with individuals all across the spectrum, not in surgery, but all across the spectrum, from healthcare providers to researchers to those people who are interested in the business side as well. So let me just stop there and say, my name is Bartholomew Tortella. As you can see here, I work for Spark Therapeutics, which is a member of the Roche Group, a vice president at Spark, and I head up the medical affairs division. And I would like now to turn it over, ladies first, to Laurel Omert. Laurel, please introduce yourself.
Sure. So again, my name is Laurel Omert. I'm the Chief Medical Officer in a company called Hemonext, which is a small biotherapeutics quasi-startup company. And we make a product that takes blood and makes it hypoxic. So that's currently what I do. Do you want me to just kind of go into the whole journey thing? Okay.
Yes, please.
So so a lot of people, Rachel and I were talking about this, go into industry right from residency and sometimes even medical school, or they practice for a year or two and they just find out that, you know, they just don't want to take care of patients, and they, you know, reach that decision and hence go into industry. I really wasn't that way at all. I practiced for quite a long time and really enjoyed it. Never had any idea about working in industry. And my residency director actually called me up one day. And I don't know about you guys, but no matter how old you get, there's still that fear and trepidation that happens right when your residency director calls you. You're like, what did I do? You know, it's like 20 years later. So of course I did not call him back, but he persisted. And finally we talked, and he asked me to come out and run a clinical trial on a blood substitute, which is called polyheme. And I don't think there's anybody on this call that worked with it. I know Andrew Bernard was one of my investigators, and Fred Moore and Jean Moore, actually. And, you know, I said no, because I mean, what did I know about running clinical trials? And basically he wore me down because he was the residency director. So I went out and I interviewed, and it seemed really interesting. And I thought, my God, you know, sometimes we do run out of blood in the OR, and wouldn't it be great if I could just order up some of this polyheme and you know, give it to my patients while we're, you know, waiting for some other blood bank to deliver. So I did that, and it was really, really fun. I learned a lot. Now I continued to take trauma call at a different level 1 hospital. So I did trauma call 4 to 5 times a month. And, you know, kept up my skills that way. And also, you know, did it because I was planning to go back right after this Polyheme got approved. So after a couple of years, to make a long story short, Polyheme did not get approved, and it was sad. I did go back to trauma surgery full time, and I was working at IU before Larry Reed came. And then I got an offer. I had started using, when I was in the ICU at IU, I started using the TEG, and I thought it was like so cool. And, you know, I was experimenting with it, you know, getting TEGs on different patients and correlating and things like that. And they called me from Hemonetics and said, we're looking for a trauma surgery to kind of lead our launch of the TEG into the trauma arena. And I thought, God, that's really cool. I've just been using that, and it's so interesting. So that's how I got involved in Hemonetics. And, you know, you're probably picking up by now that the things that I do in industry, whereas Bartholomew is very incredibly well-rounded and open and receptive, and who's really branched out into millions of areas. I'm not. I'm very narrow. I am just interested in things that could benefit trauma patients. That's just what I want to do. So there aren't that many jobs in that area. So that, you know, I always say, well, I'll just go back to clinical practice if something doesn't work out. So I did the TEG for a while. That was really fun. And then I guess, trying to remember how I actually got into, I became interested in the fibrinogen reagent for the TEG. And I was working a lot globally with the people in Europe. And I was very impressed by how they use fibrinogen concentrate for resuscitating trauma patients. And so I got a call from CSL Behring that makes fibrinogen concentrate. And they said, we're going to do this fibrinogen trial in trauma in the US, you know, are you interested? And of course I was, because I thought fibrinogen is a great thing for my trauma patients. So I went over and did that. The fibrinogen trial they had in Europe did not work out. So they canceled my whole program, which was devastating. And instead I worked with Kcentra, PCC, and, you know, did a lot. That was okay too, because all you guys started using it off label for trauma bleeding. So that was fun for me. And we you know, planned trials, and Marty Schreiber and I worked together on a big study. So that was all in, as Bart said at the beginning, there's a lot of jobs people can do in industry, not only in different disease areas or therapeutic areas as they're called, but also just within the company. And I've either been in like research and development or medical affairs, because again, that's where you get the most, it's the most related to patients in my view. And then finally, after working at CSL for a couple of years, you know, everybody was using Kcentra, and it wasn't so fascinating anymore. And there was no plan on going back to fibrinogen, unfortunately. So when I got a call from a company, my current company, to work with hypoxic blood, I was quite fascinated. And the scientific aspect of it just sucked me in about what happens, you know, as you guys all know, you know, as blood ages, a lot of bad things happen to it. And when you take the oxygen out of blood, you attenuate all of that sequence of metabolic oxidants and damage to the red cell that occurs. So I was quite sucked in immediately about this product, and thought that'll be a fun next step. So that kind of takes us to today, and that's, you know, just kind of a brief narrative of how I sort of inadvertently got in industry, really liked it, decided I wanted to only stay with products or companies that had something to do with trauma that would benefit the trauma patients. And then also on each job, I made sure in my contract, it said that I could take time off and do trauma call, you know, at the level 1 I was working at. And that's, you know, basically kind of sums everything up for that story. So Bart now, on the other, Bartholomew has quite different story. So as I
Yeah,
say, he's much more.
And that just shows you, I had kind of risen up through the ranks in Newark with Dave Livingston and run the air medical service and the ground ambulances. And then I went down to Philadelphia to run the Hahnemann Trauma Center. And as everyone knows, we're a restless bunch, trauma surgeons. So I was looking for something to do where I could help larger numbers of patients, just as Laurel had indicated. And I actually entered industry at Merck and did medical affairs. So what's medical affairs? Internally were the company's doctors. So I worked at Merck, Novo, Pfizer, and now you can see it's Spark Gene Therapy Company. And we're the company's doctors. So they have a medical question or they want to know what the practicing surgical or practicing medical community is. They come to us. We're the subject matter experts. And Laurel was detailed very nicely her subject matter expertise and how that nicely fit with all the clinical trials in which she was involved and which she was responsible for. So I got into medical affairs, and then externally were the people who go to the meetings. We talk science to the professional medical community. We authorize grants for research that are done by the practicing medical community, and can take individual subject matter leadership roles, or as Laurel has shown, rise up to the chief medical officer, or in my case, a vice presidency. So it's also about leadership in addition to just running trials or going to meetings. You have the opportunity to contribute in that fashion, but industry also holds the opportunity to take leadership positions. And generally where surgeons are involved in industry, they rise to leadership positions. And you can see Laurel's as high as you go, a chief medical officer, outside of leaving medicine and going on to the commercial side, which would be the chief executive officer. And I spent some time in medical affairs, as I detailed. I also spent 5 years at Novo Nordisk. Back before any of you were born, there was a drug called Novo 7, and Novo 7 was used in bleeding. And then there was a pivotal global trial which ended because it wasn't able to reach its endpoint. That was the trial for which I was responsible. And Carl Hauser, lead author there, and he's up still now at my old alma mater at Beth Israel Deaconess. So I spent some time in clinical trials, but I thought that I liked medical affairs better because it really gave me the opportunity to interact with colleagues such as you are, to be on the research side, answering questions, to be internally a subject matter expert. And then as time wore on, I figured that it would be important as to my contributions to change trajectory from a subject matter expert and go into leadership. And that's a conscious decision for me. And as a result, I switched from surgical bleeding to medical bleeding. So I actually did a lot of work in hemophilia, and then had additional products added to my portfolio, and then learned the craft of medical affairs, the skills, experiences, and behaviors necessary to get to senior leadership role. Laurel would be called executive management as a chief medical officer. I would be called senior management as a vice president. And that allows you to shape the policy, that allows you to give the advice that you've accumulated, and most especially it allows you to contribute to the careers of others in the service of patients. Spark itself is a gene therapy company. We're working on various gene therapies to treat rare diseases going forward. So the beauty of this is you can see Laurel has stayed pretty much in that trauma corridor and risen to executive leadership all the time, patients as her North Star, continuing to contribute. She's quite modest, actually. She ran the registration trial that got Kcentra approved for use. And then I've done a more broad, shall we say, leadership trial with a portfolio of products and risen to the senior leadership level. And that really gives you an idea of the tremendous opportunity to continue to contribute to patients. Like Laurel, I continue to practice. Many of you may know that Hahnemann closed in 2019 due to financial crisis. And at that time, I retired from active clinical practice. But just as Laurel had done, I would take 5 nights a week at the Hahnemann Trauma Center. And industry is very good for we surgeons The reason for that is we work nights, weekends, and holidays. So it's very unlikely that any of our work would conflict with the work that is done in corporate America. And that is a scheduled type of work. That's an opportunity that really gives you the freedom to do night, weekends, and holidays. There are individuals who come from internal medicine who still continue to practice, and generally that's half a day a week. So if you have internal medicine colleagues who are also thinking about industry, we welcome them very, very much. And those that wish to can continue half a day a week or 2 full days a month. Most companies are very eager to have that done because it keeps their physicians, keeps their surgeons close to the patient and close to the practicing medical community, where they can have, I think, the greatest impact. Along the way, what else can you do? I myself took an MBA at Columbia. I wanted to say that the physician leaders of the future can often be helped by some of the techniques and body of knowledge in the MBA program. There was an EMBA program, but that's not required. As you can see, Laurel has risen to executive management without an MBA. That's another thing that you could do. Some people get Masters of Public Policy, Masters of Public Health. All of those provide additional perspectives and lenses and ideas that you can use when you go into industry. And there's an aphorism, and that aphorism is, the hardest job to get is your first job. Once you get into industry, you will find a very broad horizon of opportunities opening up to you. And as I jokingly said before we started the formal session, as a physician, you can do any job in the entire organization, Merck, Novo, Pfizer, Spark, except Chief Legal Officer. And you can see that Laurel has gone medical affairs, clinical trials. I've gone clinical trials, medical affairs, but there is pharmacovigilance. There is commercial, if you choose commercial. Yeah, exactly. So there's a whole breadth of opportunities once you get into industry to maintain your clinical practice, as we said, although at a lower pace, but get in and really contribute so that what you do, instead of one patient at a time, which is very important and why I and Laurel continue to practice, because that one patient at a time is extremely important. But this gives you the opportunity to impact hundreds, thousands, and depending upon where you go, millions or tens or hundreds of millions. Clearly, the work that Laurel did with Kcentra is pivotal, and that drug now is available and approved and has changed the practice when it comes to reversal for that appropriate type of coagulation. So that was the real draw you hear many physicians talking about when they indicate why they went into industry. It was a crisis decision to make a bigger impact on a broader stage. So with that, let me stop. I know classically, many people have a lot of questions. I know I am certainly very happy. I'm in the East Directory. You can look me up, Laurel, as well. If questions come to mind for our colleagues who are watching on a recorded basis, please feel free to email me. I'm sure Laurel would also accept emails. You can get in touch with me, and then we can chat, or get Laurel can chat. And the last thing I would say is, give yourself permission to think about this as a career choice. It was very common back in 2 or 3 decades ago that you'd go into trauma surgery and that would be it. That would be your telos, your pinnacle role. But in the generations that have followed me and those in the baby boomer, it is very common to have multiple career corridors in your portfolio. That may be within surgery itself. You go into administration, become a dean or a chair. But it may also be the fact that you take the skills, experiences, and behaviors you have in surgery and then take that to a new career. So I would say give yourself permission to consider that. It's a tremendously fulfilling career where you impact hundreds and thousands, even millions of patients. And it is desperate for well-trained, compassionate, patient-centered leaders, which are basically trauma surgeons and acute care surgeons. Thank you.
Great, that's awesome. Thank you both so much. I really appreciate that kind of overview of industry and how it intersects with your practice. Dr. Tortella, you had mentioned, of course, the first job is the most difficult one to get surgeons or even more senior surgeons who have no experience in industry, but might be kind of thinking about dipping their toe in. Any specific advice for getting that first job?
Call me, call Laurel. If you go to a meeting, talk to the medical affairs person on the exhibit floor and say you'd like to have a coffee or an iced tea with them. Start talking to people who are in industry and make that known to them. They can tell you far more in the rather formal discussion we're having today on a one-on-one basis. So if you're thinking about that, start talking with, and just don't go up to the booth and say, I'm interested in going industry. Find the physician or the surgeon who is staffing the booth, or if they're not there, give them your name, your number, your contact. They'll be happy to talk with you. I love getting those contacts because we can sit down and have a beer, a coffee, or a tea and really get into this. And it's a decision you make over time. I myself thought about it for many years before I made it. Laurel indicated she had been pursued, invited for quite a while before she had decided to make that decision. So this is a step on the journey. Talk to physicians who are already in industry and form from them an impression of what areas in industry you would be interested, and then make them part of your network. Laurel, any comments from you?
Yeah, I think the first step is the hardest, and I was lucky in that, you know, my residency director, you know, was he had developed polyheme, so he knew me. So, and then, you know, after that, I just got, you know, people follow you on LinkedIn, so then they just ask you if you. I mean, today I got, like, I'm sure Bartholomew gets those too. You get 3 of those, you know, things. Would you be interested in, you know, Cellfire was calling me today. So, oh gosh, what was I going to say about that? The thing, it's CSL Behring, which is a pretty big company, they seem to be interested in people who are investigators on some of their clinical trials. So if you're involved in those, I think that's a really good way of you know, getting in there. And at CSL, they hired lots of people. One guy had been part of a liver transplant trial, and he, you know, he signed on as the medical director to plan more trials in R&D. And it was funny because, and this is a message I give you, you know, don't quit medicine entirely, I think, at first, right, Bartholomew? Because this guy, he was like, I'm tired doing transplant. I get up at night all the time. You know how transplant is, right? It's very, you know, just unpredictable. So I said, don't quit. Keep doing stuff because you won't know if you like this. And he's like, really? I said, yeah, just be careful. There must be something in transplant surgery you could do. So he would actually go on donor harvest. And sure enough, after it was really only 9 months to a year, he called me. He said, I'm so glad you told me to keep, you know, doing stuff in medicine because I really don't like this. I'm quitting. So I was like, whoa, okay, well, good luck, you know. But anyway, they got him from a clinical trial, and there was an OB-GYN woman they got from a postpartum hemorrhage trial. So if you're in any clinical trial, that's a really easy way to make.
Yeah, and the phrase that pays is, I want to speak to the medical director or the clinical trial medical director. Once you use that phrase, medical director, the commercial people will immediately click into who you want to speak with.
Mm-hmm. Or if you do an investigator-initiated study and they get to know you as the investigator, that's, you know,
correct.
A friend of mine who was actually a pathology type of person at Emory, she did a lot of ROTEM studies. And, you know, next thing you know, I think she's the head, I think she's somewhere, something high up in ROTEM, Instrumentation Laboratories, as it's now called.
Yeah, I did a lot of antibiotic.
The question I get asked a lot, you know, one-on-one, so maybe people are too, you know, they don't want to ask it in a large group. They go, is it easier? Is it easier than trauma surgery? And of course it's easier. You don't have to stay up all night, you know, so on the surface, yeah, that's an easy answer. You know, I mean, and I'm of the generation, I did every third night or every other night for like 7 years in a row. So I've been tired. So of course it's easier when you can sleep every night, you know, so that's a no-brainer. But let's eliminate the night call and just say on a daily basis, you know, how does it compare in terms of workload? And that's actually very varied. So I think, you know, the trauma people like me and Bartholomew and Carol Shermer, right? You know, we do have that gene that we work all the time. And, you know, I work on the weekends and late, you know, we have a global team. So there's Europe at 5 in the morning and Australia at 7 at night and things like that. So you can be in a situation where you work a lot, you know, similar to trauma surgery, but, you know, people have different things going on in their lives at different times in their lives. And there are jobs that are, I think, I don't know what Bartholomew did, but I think they're pretty cushy. And you know, the example that people seem to always gravitate to is safety. There's a lot of people in safety. It's a very 9-to-5 job, and a lot of, it seems like a lot of women who want to build up their families go into safety because there's no call. And I don't know, it just, that's the gossip about safety, is that if you really don't want to work too hard, go into safety. And then there's a gradation. So, you know.
And I would say it's challenging in a different way. So just to pick up Laurel's thread, which I certainly very much agree with, the safety is a much more controlled environment until
something bad
until you have to make a decision. Dear doctor, do we need to immediately call the FDA and have our drug put on hold? If you're doing a clinical trial and a safety event occurs, you go to your safety colleague. Do I have to immediately stop this clinical trial? Or I spent a time in manufacturing. Dr. Tortella, there's been a manufacturing variance. Do we immediately need to stop production and recall all of the medications that we have released since the time of the incident to now? So it's challenging in a different way than trauma surgery is, but that challenge is still there. And it usually revolves around a clinical trial, a marketed product, a decision to pursue a particular candidate. Dr. Tortella, do you think this candidate and the work that has been done in animals is appropriate to take to the clinic? And if you say no, they discard it. That's a big decision. They discard all that work they've done and they start over. Now, you're not the only one making that decision. It may be the team, you may be consulted, but it's challenging in a different way. And the decisions have repercussions for companies. I've always been a large company person. Laurel's gone large and small. So when the senior vice president of manufacturing would turn to me around the table, that was my decision to make and give to him. And that would be reflected to the FDA. And that would have big implications, especially if patients were on that medicine and that medicine needed to be recalled. So it's challenging in a different way. and the stress is there in a different way. But it's still a very, very fulfilling thing because you get to look at data, you get to form your opinion, you get to talk with colleagues, some medical, some commercial, some research, some legal, and your voice is extremely powerful because you're the only one in the room that's touched a patient. You're the only one in the room who's treated this disease. You're the only one in this room who's a physician. And that carries a tremendous amount of weight and responsibility, which we accept gladly because it's all in the service of helping our patients.
Again, thank you so much. Does anyone else on the line have any questions for Dr. Tortella or Dr. Omert?
Yes, my name is David Rube. I'm a just graduate from my fellowship. I will start my new job. Thank you very much for your time to discuss this important topic. One quick question is, how do you know that like the spectrum of this job, like who can introduce you to that in a way that you know it fits what you can bring to the table in terms of your background and knowledge? And I know that you touched that topic, but I just feel that I don't know how can I fit to that world.
Laura, why don't you start?
Well, you know, maybe one of the things that you can do, so many people use LinkedIn. So, you know, if you put out there, I'm a trauma surgeon, interested in X, looking for a job in industry. That, I mean, that's kind of one way to do it that doesn't, you know, require too much effort. Another way is to get a recruiter. There's a million recruiters and there's a bazillion jobs, and they talk to you. And in general, they're very nice and rather knowledgeable people. And you know, they'll keep an eye out for you. And sometimes you don't hear from them for a long time. And next thing you know, they're calling you and they're saying, you know, there's this really interesting job that's reminded me of you. You know, so that would be, I think, if you're really serious, I just would get a recruiter and go that way. But otherwise, you could just kind of put yourself out there on LinkedIn and see what happens. And when you do that, you know, maybe you won't really find the perfect job, but you'll see the network of jobs by just kind of getting into that cycle. You know what I mean? So I don't know. What do you think, Bartholomew?
No, that's exactly right. And believe me, you'll get calls right away, within 3 to 4 months at the latest. And the recruiters will want to know several things. What type of job are you interested in? Do you want to move? How much do you want to travel? Would you move internationally? So have those answers kind of pre-prepared, because what they're doing is filling out an Excel spreadsheet with your name on it, your ideas and your desires to move or stay put or anything else. So the faster you go through that, the easier it is for them to start talking with you about what you're interested in. So how do I know what I'm interested in? Well, what I would do is start going to companies on their career tabs and read the job descriptions. The job descriptions attached to open positions can tell you an awful lot about what the job is going to be. And it's generally medical director jobs where you would find your entry level, and that would be entry level medical affairs, entry level clinical trials, entry level pharmacovigilance, safety, etc. Next thing you do is polish up your resume, not your CV, but your resume. Because your resume is a little different. And then if anyone's interested in resumes, let Laurel, I know, we'll talk to you about business resumes as opposed to the traditional. And then the last thing is just start talking to those medical directors that you've located on the exhibit floor, or call myself or Laurel. Let us give you interesting ideas or ask you clarifying questions. But LinkedIn, resume, and get ready for the recruiters, because once you put yourself as looking, the recruiters will come, and then they'll have those first demographic questions they'll ask you, and then and I have recruiters still calling me now, but I'm not that interested in moving. I like where I am as head of medical affairs, and I like where I live in Philadelphia. But I always give them names of other people, which they love, because they may say, well, Dr. Tortella doesn't seem like a good fit for you, but you've always been helpful to me giving names. So if you've had that conversation with the medical director or medical directors that you talked to at the meeting that you were, or the clinical trial physician that you saw when you were at an investigator meeting, you'll get on their radar screens. So when they get a call, it's, well, I'm very happy where I am, but you might want to talk to Susan Smith or Jim Jones. I met him at the last East meeting, and he talked to me about his interest. He might be just the person for this type of position. So we serve as networkers and connectors for you in East, or anybody who comes and asks us to assist them in kind of getting in or taking promotion. So if you're interested in the Spark, it's like, what kind of company is Spark? Or what was your time at CSL like, Laurel? We can also give you a little behind the scenes thumbnail of what that particular personality of the company is, which may assist you in your decision making as well.
You know, David, there's also, I don't know if you'd be interested in this, but there are a couple companies that have training programs. And I know Abbott does, maybe they're the bigger companies. And as a lot of people go right into these training programs from medical school or residency. So they put you in the different departments that we've been talking about. So you do like 6 months of medical affairs, 6 months of research and development, 6 months of early clinical development, 6 months of safety, and you really become, sometimes they even put you in marketing and make you do that for 6 months, which I would kill myself. But, you know, they really train you into all facets of the company, and you get to know, you know, you really get to know a lot. I kind of wished I had done that, but I kind of couldn't do it in retrospect, but you really understand how each division functions then. And those people usually rise up to, you know, very high levels because they're just so good at navigating, you know, all these different personalities and things. So that's another option. I don't think that training programs, they don't pay you a whole lot for the first year or so, but then, you know, after your training, you get comparable, because they do ask you, and don't let this intimidate you. Sometimes you'll read required 5 years of industry experience, right, before you apply for the job, right? Just ignore that, right? And apply, right, Bartholomew? Because they all
absolutely.
say that. And you got to get that first 5 years somewhere, right?
And Spark has we call them fellowships. So we actually have ours, we have a 1-year fellowship and just went to a 2-year fellowship where people rotate through. It's common for us to have PharmDs do that, but if the physician, surgeon wanted to do that, that's perfectly well. And most of the time that ends up getting a job in the company. So it's a chance for you to kick the tires on us and for us to see where your talents lie if you wanted to stay within the company where you're doing the fellowship. Good question, David. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Tortella and Dr. Omert, it's Christine with East. Hi, thank you so much for doing this. I actually wrote down, I thought that was a great little nugget about opening up the job descriptions that you had said, Dr. Tortella. Those could also probably be helpful in crafting your resume too, of, you know, the types of things that you need to highlight and point out on your resume. But yeah, I think that's a great little nugget there to look at those.
And then if you can't understand what they're saying, call Laurel or I. And because
There's so much jargon.
Yeah, right. So I can translate for you because I write them all the time. Laurel's written them all the time, and they're rather formulaic, and you have to use certain phrases, etc., because HR requires that for various reasons. But I can translate, or Laurel can translate for you.
One of the fun things to do in industry is to tell people how ridiculous they are at some of the three-letter acronyms and names they have, like the term key opinion leader, right? I mean, do you know you all on this call are key opinion leaders? I think that is the most ridiculous thing. And I remember I told, I don't know, Marty Schreiber or something, and he just fell over laughing. He was like, what the hell does that mean? You know, so I feed that back to the company, and they're like, oh, I don't know why anyone would take offense. I said, they don't take offense. They just think it's ridiculous. You know, stop calling them that. They're doctors or clinicians or something, you know. So that's one of the other, you know, side fun things is to say, just stop doing that. You know, you work with the sales team, and that is hilarious because, you know, I don't know if Bartholomew had to do this, but you have to do these mock things. So you're the doctor. They make you be the doctor. Okay, so I'm the doctor, and they practice on you, right? And they're so funny because they're so irritating. I mean, you know the type of sales guys that come after you, right? And so I respond to them, and they always they're like, oh my God, you sound just like them. I'm like, it's because I am them. That's why, you know, so don't say stupid things like that, you know. And it always turns out to be fun because they're always very nice people, but they just kind of go about it in a sort of way that is, you know, kind of irritating to all of us. So you can really help them. You really can help them.
Are there any other questions? Okay, if that's the case, then I'd like to thank you both so much for such an interesting conversation that, you know, honestly, a lot of us don't have any experience with at all. So very grateful, much appreciated.
You're most welcome. And as I said, those people who are watching remotely on the recording, please feel free to look Laurel and I up in the directory. We're happy to respond to any questions and go into deeper if you have any other particular situations in which you're interested.
Great. Have a great night, everybody.
Okay, thanks so much.